So, folks, last week, some of y'all asked me if I could take a look at this content creator, Metatron, over on YouTube. And I have no idea who this guy is, okay? But I go to his YouTube channel, and he's got over 1 million subscribers. You know, he's not like small. He's not like a tiny channel. You know, he's been going more into political content lately. And, Sony needs to stop with this, and it's, rainbow flags, or the UK's in grave danger, or Netflix is indoctrinating your children, which we might circle back and talk about at a later date. But it's conservative content. Like he's talking about like Destiny and Piers Morgan and LGBTQs and all of that stuff. And of course, I saw his video, White Slaves, and I clicked on it, and because I was curious. And it took me down an informational rabbit hole. And I just kind of wanted to like share that with you, share the journey that I went on with all of you. Okay, like, it might be fun. We might learn a thing or two, share a couple laughs, and grow as people. Let's find out.
I told you he was based. Okay, Björn Andreas Bullhalsen, friend of the channel. He made a video titled, and I'm covering part of it, They Don't Want You to Know About This. And it's talking about white slavery.
They don't want you to know about this! Can we just anytime someone names their video, they don't want you to know about this, or says about a subject, they don't want you to know about this, who's they? Who's they in this circumstance? Okay, no one was aware of white slavery before? I don't know, I feel like people are aware. I know it's clickbait, but also, the implication behind they don't want you to know about this is that there is some conspiracy to prevent you from learning basic factual information about history. It's conspiratorial. We're starting off with an appeal to conspiracism,
From a Mediterranean man to a northern brother, the floor is yours.
Hi there, and welcome to my local woods. Today I want to talk about a part of history that they don't want you to know about. Millions of people were stolen in Europe and brought to the caliphates, to the Muslim areas. And the Vikings were very active in that trade.
Yes, they were. Though, to describe Vikings as being very active in the trade of slaves is a bit of an understatement, but let's let him talk a little bit more here. We'll circle back to Viking slavery in a bit.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in this video. I want to make a campfire as well. Slavery is of course a very dark chapter in the story of mankind, and I think that we owe it to the victims to tell their story.
Absolutely. Good start. It is a chapter of mankind, isn't it? Because everyone enslaved everyone.
And right there, Metatron kind of reveals his hand. Well, it is a chapter of mankind, isn't it? Because everyone enslaved everyone, and there's a lot of really important context happening here, but the argument that is inevitably going to be made here is that, well, see, they don't want you to know that white people were also enslaved. You all think just people of color were enslaved, but no, it was also white people. And it's people knew that. People knew that already. There's just a big difference between the time periods and the effects that people are still experiencing. And specifically when folks are talking about the modern slave trade, were the predecessors to the modern slave trade and capitalism. Specifically, they're talking about the transatlantic slave trade. And the transatlantic slave trade had specific qualities, had elements of a global trade that had never been seen really before on that scale. It was done on a scale and on a timeline, massively reformed to be essentially as close to a mechanical system as possible, right? There are big differences here. And I want to see which direction they take with this, because like, of course you have like the racialized elements of it, and to say like, well, in the past they didn't have racial elements to it. I mean, like, maybe they did, but the difference between that, like, elements of like, well, maybe they had like a different concept of race, but that still played into slavery, etc., whatever. But comparing that to the transatlantic slave trade basically kicked off eugenics, basically kicked off with like scientific racism, like this idea that like, well, it's okay to enslave black people because they are scientifically inferior. And that, you know, that was a kind of a new codification of the system that was accepted again on a global scale. You know, and we're then combining that with the system of colonialism and wealth extraction at the cost of like colonies and colonists, you know, out of which, you know, the American Revolution arises, and you get, you know, the Haitian Revolution as well. You get like a bunch of these different revolutionary periods of time in various different colonial holdings. And this isn't to say that other forms of slavery didn't exist, or that slavery in the ancient era or the Viking era or the Middle Ages was like non-existent. You know, it's kind of one of those, you can pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time. These two things are not in conflict.
Literally. This guy's legit.
This guy's legit. I love his argumentation strategy of lighting a fire while cosplaying.
Now, slavery was, of course, practiced by the Ottoman Empire, and we still have slavery today in Muslim countries.
You know, and this is where I realized, because I watched a little bit of this, and this is where I realized, oh, he's gonna make this out to be like, oh, this was like Muslims are slavers thing. This is gonna be like the Middle East are just full of slavers, and you know, they enslaved white people. And I'm interested to see where it goes, because I've heard this argument before. I have a few responses to it, but I want to see how deep the hole he digs for himself is here.
That is the sad truth. Now, I think that the story that some people out there, dare I say the establishment, want you to believe is that, you know, the white man is bad, and that's pretty much it.
Damn straight. This is and has been absolutely one of the major talking points that we've been fighting against. And when I say we, I mean decent people that just want the truth. It's been years now. This idea that you have to paint white people and people of European descent and Europeans, like me, in general white people like in America, in Britain, as the oppressor, enough. Why don't we just learn to stop judging people by the color of their skin? And it is ironic that the very people that call you racist are the ones that are the most racist.
Yes, this guy is Metatron. Sorry, the other one that's cosplaying is a guy named Bjorn something or other.
But slavery has been practiced by so many cultures up through history.
Absolutely.
And if we go back to, you know, the time between the 15th and 18th century.
I love, first of all, I love this, right? Like, we're starting off with just white aggrievement, you know, just like, oh, they want you to think white people are bad. And like, my initial gut response to that is, I mean, I guess I can see how you'd get that if you are being taught history and you're a complete moron. You know, like I'm sorry, but like if your takeaway from learning historical facts is, well, you just want us to believe white people are bad, like you didn't understand what you were taught. You didn't understand at all what was being put forward. And like because the human history is more complicated than white people bad. But what is relevant and the reason why like people come away with the basic idea, well, I guess white people are bad, is because like the transatlantic slave trade and capitalism and eugenics and like race science codified, along with, you know, to some extent, evangelical Christianity codified this idea of a hierarchical system based on race and spread it throughout the world, you know, like, and that happened relatively recently under the transatlantic slave trade, right? Under the system of colonialism, you know, like when we look at colonialism as a system of like resource extraction, that continued well into, you know, the 1900s and to some extent still to today. You know, like we are talking about a system that was perpetrated predominantly by white European powers and later on by, you know, American powers. And
the transatlantic slave trade? Even slavery was woke?
Oh no, that's why they had to get rid of it. Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. And they're like, well, did you know that during this 3-century time period, the Ottoman Empire did a lot of slavery? It's like, yeah, but like talking about the transatlantic slave trade doesn't preclude other slave trades from existing or being bad.
The Barbary pirates, they took slaves on the British Islands. Much more than 1 million. I think some people are saying 1.5 up to 2 million people were stolen. And I want to bring you even further back.
If you look at this map, you will see the 2 major Varangian trade routes. The one to the right is the Volga trade route, and this route was essential for trade during the Viking Age.
Now the Rus, they used that trade route to supply the Muslim merchants with slaves from Northern Europe. Mm-hmm. And here's something that most people don't know. Along that route, going to the
but the thing is, right, like, who's they who don't want you to know these basic, undisputed historical facts? Like, you're talking, like, well, they don't want you to know about thing you could easily look up in a book if you have the curiosity, the time, and the inclination. You know, like...
Abbasid Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire, you had castration centers or stations where the male slaves were castrated. That was...
It's kind of like they did in China and produced the eunuchs. Whenever there is a power and an authority that does this, it's usually because they want to place those slaves, for instance, as servants of women of importance, wives or daughters. Usually, at least in China, that's why it happened. Some eunuchs, in fact, became quite powerful and prosperous. But, of course, it's a horrific thing. And believe it or not, and I'm going to say this, I know he's going to appreciate, because he's someone who can't stand bullshit, but I found a university professor, you understand the kind already, who was so focused on having to own the chuds and show the beauty of whatever the heck he was trying to push, that he literally talked about the eunuchs in China as an example of transgender people who were empowered.
Well, because some people would volunteer to be eunuchs. Like, some people volunteered for that. So, yeah. There are also examples, by the way, in European history of, for example, monks voluntarily castrating themselves. Like, this is not a practice unique at all to just the Ottoman Empire. Various kingdoms and clergy throughout Europe also did this. Also, just, kind of, I feel like this is maybe a little bit on the nose here, but there's literally a book about the practice of castration in Europe, specifically during the Middle Ages, titled Castration and Culture in the Middle Ages, appropriately. And just want to let you guys know that a large section of that book is dedicated to the fact that Vikings raided monasteries specifically to look for eunuchs so that they could then sell them. Because a large amount of what was happening in Europe was slavery by the Vikings. The Vikings were some of the biggest slavers of the medieval era. And so, like, this argument, like, oh man, did you know that, like, people took white slaves? And it's like, yeah, the white people were enslaving white people, by and large. Like, even when you're talking about, like, they had the trade routes, the Volga trade route. Yeah, they weren't. That was white people enslaving other white people.
Transgender people. Let me make this crystal clear. Eunuchs were victims. Has nothing whatsoever to do with transgenderism.
I mean, they were victims for sure, unless they volunteered for those surgeries, which some did.
Anything of the sort. Having clarified that nonsense. Did you notice that when he mentioned about people, he said they were stolen? He's talking about slaves, right? Again, a horrific aspect of human history. They did it in Africa, they did it in Asia, they did it in Europe, they did it everywhere. Everywhere. Ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and there are different types of slavery. Chattel slavery in the modern sense functions in one way, and it has some areas of overlap with slavery in classical antiquity. Ancient Egyptians had slaves as well, contrary to what some people are trying to push now, saying, no, people building the pyramids, there were no slaves, you're out of your mind.
Wait, no, the argument isn't that there were no slaves in Egypt. The argument is that the pyramids specifically were built by paid laborers, because they needed to be skilled at doing the labor of building. Like, that's... The argument is that they were paid to build the pyramids, not that there were no slaves in Egypt.
And of course, there were slaves, and there were also specialized workers, regardless. Did you notice that he said that these people were stolen? And I think that that is the correct term to use. Why? Well, simply because from the perspective of ancient period, I'm talking about classical antiquity a little bit, he'll have to tell me if this concept overlaps with the Viking Age. I'm not sure about that, so I look forward to see what you think about it, Björn. But from the perspective of the Romans, the slaves were talking tools. So they didn't see them as humans, they saw them as objects. So they're tools, but they can talk. But they're still tools. Now, the dehumanizing aspect of, for example, the perspective of the Romans towards other people, usually enemies, is not limited to slavery. Even from a civil perspective, the way they considered, for instance, barbarians in the far north, not all the way to Scandinavia, I'm talking about Germanic tribes and Celts, is that they would consider them as half-beasts. That is, however, not a form of racism, before anyone joins in and asks about that. It is a form of derogatory sentiment, but it's not necessarily racism because it's not an immutable characteristic, meaning that someone can be half a beast or a slave in this case, so they are a tool. But if said Celt gains citizenship, then he's a full human being now. And if the talking tools buy their own freedom or are freed, for instance, very common in ancient Rome because of the death of their master, then they're not tools anymore. So this is an interesting aspect of Roman mentality that is often different to the way racism in the modern sense functions.
Yeah, because you're talking about you're talking about like citizenship, which can be given to anybody, right? Like when we're talking about like the scientific racism and eugenics system under which modern day slavery operated on, at least in the transatlantic sense, like the idea was it didn't matter if you were free or a slave, you were fundamentally always going to be lesser than white people, right? And that was backed up not just by the scientific texts that were circulated, but it's backed up by the religious beliefs that were circulated. And many people of the time were brought up entirely within that thought process explicitly stated to them, right? And like when you look at a system like Roman slavery, for example, it's much more porous. There's much more moving between stations. You know, you can have power as like a slave in Roman society. You can be given authority and like you can take on different skill sets, etc. And at the end of your servitude, you can be granted citizenship. That isn't exactly at all. That isn't at all how like slavery operated, at least in America, in the United States.
But when he said stolen rather than like kidnapped or taken away, it made me think of this.
It's a common practice. You would probably, or almost certainly, be castrated as a male slave in one of the caliphates. And the cruelty of that, it's almost hard to imagine. And how many people who died after that procedure, nobody knows. And nobody knows how many people were captured in Europe and brought as slaves to the Muslim caliphates. Nobody knows, but I think we're talking millions. Now here in Scandinavia you have places.
I mean, I love that this guy is admitting that he has no idea, but then following it up with like, probably millions, I don't know. Like, you know, maybe you should figure that out. You know, maybe it'd be a good idea to like figure out at least some rough numbers being put forward by people who do look into this stuff. You know,
several places actually called Trelleborg, and that means slave castle.
Really?
In other words, it used to be, those places used to be slave markets.
Oh. Of course, I didn't understand is the word he used because I don't speak any Nordic languages. But now that I think about it, Boig, of course, sounds like berg, which I can understand as a fortress or fortification. But the first word is clearly, it doesn't share roots etymologically with the word slave, but it probably does with the word thrall, because we do have that word in English. So
yes, that was the pause that I was trying to make. The point he's putting out there that like, oh yeah, you know, in the Scandinavian countries, there's the word thrall. And yeah, that's the word that is used most often for like to indicate like Nordic servitude, you know, and for all intents and purposes, it is slavery, right? People were sometimes owned, you know, across generations. You know, if you had children, like your children were born into slavery. Into thraldom, as it were. And I also want to throw out there that if we're talking about comparisons between like the Viking thraldom and the slavery of the Ottoman Empire, worth pointing out that at the height of the Viking Age, around 25% of the entire population of all Nordic countries combined was made up of thralls. 25%. To put that in perspective, that would be just an astronomical number of people in the United States. We're talking like what? 75 million people in the United States would be enslaved if you like make that direct comparison. And like those slaves were by and large white people. You know, this is where we get like the root word for slave from Slav. Like that's, you know, like when they talk about like people don't want you to know this. I mean, like it's pretty hard for people not to know this when like we literally use the word slave. So this is all very frustrating to me as somebody who actually cares about this topic and actually has learned about this topic. That's nuts.
Thrallberg would be an English adaptation of what he's saying. That's so cool. How did he say it?
In Scandinavia, you have places, several places actually, called Trelleborg.
Trelleborg. I probably butchered it, but I do believe it's connected to Thrallberg.
25% of our population is imprisoned? If you're talking about the United States, no.
And that means slave castle. In other words, it used to be, those places used to be slave markets. Hedeby or Haitabu was also a slave market. Not only
I also just want to like throw out there, like, okay, we're talking about slavery. What about serfdom? You know, when we're looking at like, you know, 1500s to 1800s, you know, like you have to look at serfdom in Europe, because serfs had no rights outside of whatever their lords gave them. If their lord wanted to like squeeze them for everything they have until they died, their lord could do that. So I just, yeah, serfs were shackled to the land, right? And so I'm just kind of, there seems to be a lot of missing analysis here. And like, sure, did serfs have limited freedoms, not like above that of a slave? Sure, but not that much more.
only a slave market, but it was a place where people traded with slaves, and many other places were used as used for that purpose as well. Now, why is this not taught in schools?
Oh, let me tell you why.
Why?
Well, the reason for that is quite simple, and that is you went to bad schools. You went to bad schools. You went to bad schools. Because, let me tell you something, guys. They do teach this in schools. If you have an instructor who gives a shit, you do get taught this in schools. And when you're saying, like, they didn't teach us this, it's because you guys lived in fucking austerity countries. Countries that were pushing austerity measures, thanks to neoliberalism. They cut the educational system, and guess what? You guys got less good education. Your education suffered as a result. The curriculum got narrowed, questions became discouraged, testing became rampant, and like, if you didn't learn this stuff, it's because your schools were defunded by conservatives. Like, if you're wondering, why didn't we learn about this? Well, it's because conservatives didn't want you to know about it, ding-dongs.
Why is this essential part of European history not taught in schools? Because it's not. As far as I know,
Same, yeah.
they don't teach this in school.
As far as I know, I haven't looked into it at all, but, it is not taught in schools. I have made a set of assumptions, and I'm unwilling to question those assumptions.
Not even in Southern Europe, I'll give him my perspective as well. Never heard of it, to be honest, so...
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. In Southern Europe, you never learned about, like, Mediterranean slavery? You didn't learn in your history courses about... like enslavement via the Mediterranean system of trade? No? You didn't learn about that? I call bullshit on that. I call absolute and complete bullshit. No, Fox of Fate, that can't be true. Metatron is from Sicily? And you're telling me you didn't learn about this shit? I don't believe you. I don't believe you, and I think you're a liar. And I'm not talking to you, Fox of Fate. I do believe you. I'm talking about Metatron. I never learned about this. I think you did, and I think, frankly, you're a dumbass who forgot about it. Just like, I'm sorry, you didn't learn about it. I learned about this shit. I fucking played Age of Empires 2, and I learned about this shit. I learned about it in school and from Age of Empires. And, like, frankly, Metatron looks old enough that he's probably played Age of Empires too. They released a remaster of it. But, like, damn, dude. Jesus.
These numbers, I mean, of course, I've heard of... I'm not into Muslim history myself, apart from auxiliary Islamic history, such as the, after the Reconquista, or, like, the expansion into the West in Spain, or, for instance, the... contact because of the Crusades, of course, all of that, but deep Islamic history, I don't know much. It's outside of my area of...
You claim to have learned about the Crusades and you didn't learn about white slavery? Dude, like, so many of the Crusades were all about slavery. A few of them entirely devolved into, like, slave hunting expeditions. And a few of them also were enslaved almost in their entirely. Like, the entire, like, Orphans Crusade got enslaved. What are you talking about? You didn't learn this shit. Fuck you. Fuck these incurious clowns.
Expertise, but it's correct. This is not covered in regular, like, middle school, high school, and whatnot.
Teach about the transatlantic slave trade,
True.
but not about the slaves being stolen, the people being stolen and sold as slaves in Northern Europe and the entire Europe. Why?
You know, that's crazy, but also, like, if we're going to talk about, like, the enslavement of people in Europe, then you got to talk about how the Vikings were the slavers. And a lot of people just don't talk about that because it makes them look bad. In Europe, in the European context, a lot of people don't talk about that. But you know what? It's fucking true.
Is that not being taught in schools?
Very good point.
Are we talking...
Like, why is that not being taught in schools? Gee, I don't know. Maybe it's because, like, America is the imperial hegemon of the world, and thus you guys learn more about our history than sometimes other, like, people inside the United States learn about our history. Like, maybe it has something to do with the fact that your curriculums are all heavily biased around America because America is the imperial hegemon, you know, and is, you know, doing invasions and has colonies and whatnot and nuclear weapons. Like, yeah, you're gonna learn about, like, the transatlantic slave trade, because guess what? Europe heavily participated in that. The transatlantic slave trade is important and imperative to understand in the modern context because it was effectively the vehicle for codifying capitalism as the dominant economic mode of production to this day. Like, it's an important and pivotal event in the way that, like, you know, frankly, Viking slavers over 1,000 years ago aren't necessarily, you know, they are relevant in some contexts, but, like, you need to understand the transatlantic slave trade to understand modern, like, trade, modern capitalism, modern ideas. Also, the transatlantic slave trade is super relevant because it generated the startup capital for this global hegemon. Yeah, exactly.
White guilt here?
Nonsense.
I think we are. But I do believe that the truth is extremely important.
Absolutely.
And
Are we talking about white guilt here? I don't know, man. Are you advocating to have, like, more guilt for, like, Nordic participation in, like, the slave trade 1,000 years ago? Like, what exactly are you advocating here? It seems like the entire purpose of this video is one big gotcha, but it's, you know, only a gotcha if you're one of the stupidest motherfuckers around, you know?
must keep telling the truth. That's what I'm trying to do here on this channel. Now, of course, as a historical novelist, I deal with these topics every day. Mm-hmm. And as someone who is obsessed with the Viking Age, you know, I also realize that many horrible things were done by my ancestors.
Oh, wow. Okay, look, he's taking some responsibility. Great. But then what is the point of this? Like, if the point of this isn't, like, Muslims bad, then the point is just they don't want you to know that white people were enslaved. Like, you're bringing the white people into this, okay? European people were enslaved. And it's like, well, who's they? Like, it's not that, like, libs or, like, left-leaning woke folks, like, are telling you need to learn the transatlantic slave trade so that you feel guilty about what white people did 400 years ago. That's not the reason you're learning about it. The same way if you learned about Viking slavery, the point isn't that you should feel guilty about what people did 1,000 years ago. It's so that you can be better informed about how to act and what to believe in the current present moment. It's so that you're informed about the context of the world in which you live in. The idea that this is meant to foment some kind of racial resentment is in itself a conservative conspiracy theory. And it's just, it's interesting, I guess. But like, these are things that can only be spread and internalized by some of the dumbest motherfuckers alive.
See what I mean? It's a Nordic man who's obsessed with Viking history. Then you got an Italian here who's obsessed with Roman history. And for some reasons, the same people that push nonsense such as white guilt. At this point, it should be human guilt if we really want to push.
But wait, who's pushing white guilt? Who is pushing the idea of white guilt? What are you talking about? Like, oh man, they want you to have human guilt now. It's like, no, they just want you to be informed about the context in which you live. It's honestly shocking. What are you trying to accomplish here? Like, oh man, they want us to feel white guilt. I'm pretty sure the entire concept of the phrase white guilt is that you shouldn't feel guilty for the sins of your ancestors. But it's important to learn the context so you can help undo the harms that were done and repair the world, you know?
Eiffel 65 pushed blue guilt.
Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. It's just the entire premise of knowing these facts about history is not so that you have like fun cocktail party facts or so you can go to your D&D group and be like, actually, no, the entire point of it is so that you understand what happened in the past to get us to where we are now and how we can make the world a better place, right? And so if you understand that white supremacy has played a role, and a lot of it derives from like the eugenics and race science that arose from like the transatlantic slave trade and the commodification of human beings under capitalism, then you can then understand how there are different like racially based disparities when you look at economics, when you look at political autonomy, when you look at all of these different aspects of our world that have dire life and death consequences for some people. And to put it down to be like, you only taught me that to make me guilty. It really just belies like this protagonist idea. Like, these guys all think they're some kind of shonen anime protagonist, right? Like, they all think they're that guy. They all think they're Naruto. But like, for real, and they're just like, you just pulled this transatlantic slave trade education to make me feel guilty so that I become weak and malleable. Like, that's it, right? Like, that's what they're putting forward. You wanted to weaken me by making me less prideful in my whiteness. Well, I've outthought and outmatched your white guilt play. That's right, I play Exodia in attack position. Like, it's like some crazy nonsense that they're playing in their mind that has no bearing on the actual real world, right? And it is infuriating to see these people attempt to, like, basically say, well, I shouldn't have learned those things, to like actually good knowledge. Like, they aren't even saying that the transatlantic slave trade wasn't real. They're just upset that they learned about the transatlantic slave trade and didn't learn about other types of slave trades. And it's like, and instead of being upset at your education system that failed you, you are instead upset at the notion that you were taught about the transatlantic slave trade in the first place. You see how this is all weird and messed up and like not actually like at all coherent? Like, it's baffling to me.
Put it that way. I still don't think that sons should be guilty for the sins of their fathers, but if you really want to go that way, it should be human guilt. But in general, not only these same people are the ones that...
No, it's just a recognition that if you are actively complicit with the status quo, that status quo came from somewhere, dude. The status quo was created by what happened in the past. And so, like, if you're complicit with the status quo that was created by the past of white supremacy, there are going to be dysfunction. There's going to be dysfunction, and like modern society is going to have problems as a result of that. And if you want to fix those problems, you need to be interested in where they arose from.
I want you to not be proud and in love with the history of your people. Nonsense. I think it's great that he reenacts it, and he loves his connection and his tether to his ancestors, and that is a beautifully healthy state of mind.
I would be prone to agree with that comment from Metatron here, except for one very specific thing, and that is this guy is talking about white people. Like, Metatron and this Bjorn guy, they're talking about white people, the monolith. And white people as a racial construct. That's not a thing. You don't have a white culture. You have like a Swedish culture. You have an Italian culture or a Sicilian culture. You have a British culture, a French culture. You have, you've got an Egyptian culture. You've got like insert different area of the world culture, and that's not related to the color of your skin. And so what gets them tripped up is that they have, instead of having pride in like their ancestors and where they came from, they have pride in less than that. They actually do a disservice to their ancestors, because their pride is not in their ancestors, it's in the pigment of their skin. And that's frankly the most loser shit imaginable to be prideful of. I just have more pride. Have more pride than that. Like, white people are not a monolith. It's like being proud to have hazel eyes. Yeah. Is it valid to be ashamed that my ancestors owned slaves? I think so. Like, I think, like, if your ancestors were up to some shady shit, I think it's fine to be like, nah, I strike their name from the ancestral record,
I just want my 6 feet 5 inches olive-skinned 36J Amazonian goddess world. Is that too much to ask?
Saki Tanuki, maybe so. Maybe so. Metatron is Italian, though. His ancestors are not white monolithic people. Yeah, but there are some Italians view themselves as having assimilated into whiteness, Do conservatives have a kink for feeling oppressed? Well, they want to use the oppression in order to, like, give themselves a semblance of a moral high ground, So they try and make themselves, the victims of, like, woke oppression by ignoring all power dynamics that exist and making up their own. All right. I think we're almost done with this.
But he's not letting it obfuscate his desire for truth. If something that they did was bad, he calls it out. I told you.
Like participating in the North European and the European slave trade. Now, what I don't like is when people litter.
Yeah.
This is a tobacco box. I don't like that.
No.
I don't like it at all. So I'll bring that home. And I saw a beer can over there, so I'll bring that home as well.
I might think that this guy is kind of a dumbass, but I do like that he's anti-littering.
A few words about this channel. You will never see AI here.
Yeah.
I also appreciate his anti-AI sentiment. Okay, I think we're done. I think we're closing out. Does Metatron have any last words here?
Because I've seen people telling me, oh no, but he had a bad take once. Okay. Doing better than me then.
Wait a minute. What was this guy's bad take? When I Google this guy, what is the bad take gonna be? Oh, he's a Nazi. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Wait a minute. If you go to his channel, does he have a YouTube readily available?
Was it?
All right. Just out of curiosity here. 763,000 subscribers. coronavirus second wave is coming. Understand what it is, it's about, and prepare. How they plan to take your house. How Norway got rid of Antifa. Women need to understand this. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. All right.
You know what I mean? That's the thing. It's like this guilt by association. He's a good man. You can tell he's a good man. And he likes truth. And he speaks facts. I appreciate that. Now, if there ever is a bad take, just like I have it, you know what I do? I talk to people. That's it. You know who else did it? Charlie Kirk.
Oh man, you're just like Charlie Kirk. You're so right. You're so right, man. You guys are basically the same. Fuck. Oh man. These people are all so lame. They're all so lame.
Thank you for watching. Thank you so much, Björn, for the video. Very much appreciated, brother. Have a good one.
All right. Okay. When will the glazing of Kirk end? Probably in about a week. Like, genuinely give it another week, guys. Like, the prevalence of Charlie Kirk related shit has already, like, absolutely fallen off the face of the earth, you know? Anyway, I thought that was interesting. A fun little rabbit hole to go down, I guess. You know, I think interesting stuff. I fell down the rabbit hole of just like learning about Viking slavery, which, you know, I thought more of this video was going to be about, actually. The Smithsonian has a great article on it, just kind of like establishing some of the basic concepts of Viking slavery. And it's pretty interesting stuff, you know? I would recommend reading this. I'll link it in chat here. I know we didn't get to talk a lot about it.
Why would we ever stop blazing Charlie Kirk? Have you seen this ballroom I'm making?
Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. But it's basically how in Norse culture, like, thraldom was, like, a cornerstone of their society. Like, you had thralls essentially make up like 25% of the population, right? You had people living in thraldom their entire lives, and very rarely they'd get like these opportunities to have authority. Sometimes they would be freed, though this was very rare. And, you know, you have like, for example, like this 11th century runestone from Horning in Denmark. Toki the blacksmith raised this stone to the memory of Thorgsil, son of Gudmund, who gave him gold and freed him. You know, like, that's pretty, that's interesting. Like, just historical
Slaves under
facts.
Xerxes were in pretty good care, if I remember correctly.
Is that a reference to the Mummy? I can't remember. Thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. But, like, also, I learned about a small semi-autonomous zone in Finland called Åland. And you know, they've got a little anthem. It's situated between Sweden and Finland. It's cute. I like it. I'd like to go there sometime. Just seems like I didn't know that this place existed. Anyway, I just thought that was neat. It's like it has human history going back like 8,000 years. It's crazy. It's crazy, but super interesting and fun. I'd love to visit and see some of the ruins. So, also just worth pointing out that some of the higher end estimates, if we're talking about the Ottoman Empire and slavery, right? We're talking about like the 1500s to the 1700s. Some of the higher estimates for the number of slaves taken during that time and the total population of slaves during that time is around 2 million. And that's a lot, obviously. But also worth keeping in mind that that's 2 million taken between 1500 and 1700. That's a 200-year period. We're talking about, like, for example, if you're going to compare these two, you're comparing, like, the Viking Age, where 25% of all people in Nordic countries were slaves, versus, 10,000-ish per year. Like, that's a lot. I'm not gonna lie, but it's also it dwarfed in comparison to the long-standing, from like 800 to like 1400 period of the Viking Age. Doesn't America have like 60 million slaves right now, comparably? I mean, if you included wage slaves, maybe. Like, the American prison population is like 1.2 million. I'd consider a lot of them enslaved. You have trafficking, obviously, in the United States still as well. But in order to reach like 60 million, you need to include wage slavery. So, with that being said, I think I've said all I want to say. I just like history. I really like history, and I appreciate learning about history, and I cannot understand for the life of me anyone who is just upset at having learned an accurate piece of history and being upset that they didn't learn more history, and it being like wokeness's fault that they didn't learn more history versus a failing underfunded educational system. So, that being said, like, comment, and subscribe if you like this video.
Riverboat Jack is going to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the scenes. Politics, dating, plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord.